I put my world together around my ADHDness or around my neurodiversity, right? And then figured out how to do it. But then there are still those suffering pieces. And I think that that's something I really appreciate about the book and about you and this work as a whole is there is the gifted and tortured part, right? And feeling sort of validated in both of those, right? That it is not just there are these really cool things, but sometimes it's also hard to express. I can feel a lot of pain in a way that's like hard for me to describe or share with somebody. I remember being recently at a festival and I was opening up to a friend and he was just like, dude, like everybody loves you, but like in my mind, it can be like, I feel like everyone probably hates me. Or what if my three things, just to kind of let you know about them and we can go wherever we want with that. The happy little kid, the lifeguard, and the princess and the pea. Like those were my three strongest ones. And that ability to, really, I guess that was like the rejection sensitivity, like really resonated with me on one hand. And then also that sense of being able to be highly attuned on one hand to people's experiences, but also I don't know if it's when that gets lost or gets overwhelming. All of a sudden I feel like, is everybody messing with me? Did I miss some cue? Did I not see the right thing? And I start to feel frozen and collapse, and just like my whole world starts to collapse in on itself in a sense.
Yeah, that's your princess and the pea on the back right. The outside world is back of the brain. Yeah. And you're probably extra sensitive right up into the moment that tissue's saturated, and then you can't process all the information. You're probably picking up too much, and it's a bit, there's a very fine line between being deeply empathetic and a little bit autistic. Where you're not picking up the social, and it's just like a little bit,
Yeah.
But you don't have to be one or the other either. Some people are both. Some people are deeply empathetic and they take things literally sometimes.
Yeah.
I'm just saying. This is you. But like, that's the right tempo parietal. There's also a little structure next to the grumpy old man. There's the inferior frontal gyrus, who I affectionately dubbed the problem child. And the problem child wants to like be disruptive and oppositional for its own sake in some ways. Leave me alone. Like, be disruptive, push the thing, be negative, be oppositional. It's like a more vulnerable version in some ways of the negativity bias, and it's related to that stuff, but it has a very reactive and attachment kind of stuff too, because it's so young, that it can yield lead to behavior like blowing up your relationship by being a jerk just because you were bored, right? Or because you were a little uncomfortable, so you're oppositional. So that kind of stuff can lead to some dysregulation. But otherwise, we notice that we want to go, and useful to know that stuff happens. So
yeah, being like aware of when you want to push someone away and when that's going to serve you or not, right? And being able to have a level of relationship with that, I think, is huge. Yeah. I'm curious for you, even like, were there pieces of this that like really resonated with you in some way, shape, or form, where you're like, oh, that piece really felt like me once you started kind of even identifying this stuff for yourself in the book?
I mean, this is not nonfiction. This is definitely this is not fiction. Definitely a nonfiction, self-help style book. Right. But I think even then there's something where, all the characters are the artist or, are the author in some ways. So yes, but no, but sure. Absolutely. all of these things. You'll discover, I mean, you read the book, but I talk about these things in a very different way, I think, than many people. Even my other neurofeedback providers, colleagues, friends of mine who are psychologists and neurologists and things, have said to me things like, you think about this stuff in an interesting way. And, I think that's a compliment for most of them. So,
if you're interpreting right. Yeah.
Right. I think so. Well, they're all therapists, so you can't tell. Like if they were insulting you might not be able to tell, you might be like, oh, wow. But there's a different way of interacting with our brains than just, here's the giant label that sticks to us. And I think that's something I've identified with my whole life, is not fitting into. I mean, I was born in the 70s and grew up, teen years were mostly the 80s. ADHD was a thing, but it was like, not a very widely applied diagnosis. There wasn't a lot of medication yet. Not like the 90s where it became, de rigueur and everyone was on Ritalin and then Adderall a decade later. And that's still happening now. But I ended up sort of, getting through, raw dogging life without any of the diagnostic language, just being quirky, having trouble with, laundry and bills, having trouble with social stuff, impulsivity, not fulfilling my promise academically initially. And it was, kind of challenging. Got a diagnosis of ADHD after undergrad and went, okay, great, but I would love to do something different for, more. Medicine, psychology, something, nursing, I don't know, something. And then I worked in psychiatric hospitals and acute environments because that's a great place to be, dynamic, changing environments. If you have a lot of ADHD, you can be super chill and walk around and see all the patterns and keep things safe. Perfect. Yeah. But I kept bumping up against this thing about I can't go back and do low intensity grad school for a bunch of years or intense med school for 3 to 5 years. I barely made it through boring undergrad, and that last year was tough, just kind of, getting stuff done. So the perspective on that was the perspective on my own, tortures and gifts and things was pretty complicated, where I knew that I was, creative and quick and intelligent, but also knew that I had a really hard time finishing up undergrad and, the idea of taking on huge projects.
Yeah.
As somebody in their mid-20s at that point, was like, okay, well, I don't know. And so I ended up working in those crisis environments for a while. And toward the end of that, I may have mentioned this on the last show, but toward the end of that time, I got injured. And I couldn't keep working in the acute psychiatric, so I went and did some high-tech work for a couple of years. Missed working in with people, and since I had a lot of developmental psych, autism, et cetera experience, went and got a job at an autism center, did neurofeedback, saw amazing things, and would hang out after hours and train my own brain. And after about a month and a half of training my brain, I was like, well, wait a minute. I'm feeling very, very different, and I think I can do something more. And that led me to getting a PhD, studying neurofeedback to figure out how it works. Very meta. That's how you get through a grad program if you have ADHD, right? Because the joke is a PhD is the process of learning more and more about less and less until you know everything about nothing. Right. So, you have to niche down. You have to be driven, be pulled, be pushed by the thing you care about. And I would say if you have ADHD or something else where you're a little distractible or have some executive function difficulties, you need that even more. You need the structure of the external pulling you through, or you need other things helping, drive you through it. And that can mean changing your brain with neurofeedback or meditation. That could be supplementing with some nootropics or even medications. There's lots of ways to take control. There's life behavioral scaffolds, there's Pomodoro techniques, and at that time getting things done, and super useful. And I used them in grad school. But doing neurofeedback and knocking my ADHD back from 200% of average, just ADHD down to 20%, where it became this mild thing that I could, very easily not have to deal with in a lecture or a presentation or something, or having to grade a whole bunch of student papers. I could do that thing if I needed to, because it gave me as much control over my executive function as something like Adderall, or Ritalin would have more, actually. I've tried those things. So for me, it was a changing relationship with this stuff, understanding it and gradually getting a sense of it. But it was also changing the ability to change this stuff that started to get out. And so for the past 25 years, a lot of my, speaking from the mountaintop is about shift happens, take yours, get your brain, you can do stuff. And it's been a very neurofeedback kind of focused process, but this is to take it beyond that for folks who don't necessarily have access to an EEG or who aren't interested in doing neurofeedback and just want to understand their brains, because the understanding may yield the change sometimes.
Might be enough to have that pivot. Yeah. I'm curious for just your own experience when you said that when you're going through the ADHD stuff for yourself before neurofeedback, you had tried Ritalin or different medications, and then you eventually find neurofeedback, and this thing is working and shifting for you. What was that experience like? I mean, I know it was a long time ago, I guess, at this point, but what was that experience?
Oh, no, I remember. I remember. Because it's not that dissimilar from what happens, I would say, about 2/3 of the time with ADHD. There's one of these quality moments that I'm going to describe. And I've been training my brain for about 18 sessions. I was at a camping trip in upstate Massachusetts and was walking to go somewhere. And I was like on a path, in the woods. And I remember walking. It's a path. It's a camping trip I'd done with friends every year for like 10 years. And it was a little annoying part of camp you have to walk to. I was walking there. I just remember being like, wait a minute. Why is everything so quiet around me? Why can I pay attention to everything? Things are really clear and, both crisper and more low key at the same time. And it's very, very similar to like putting on a new pair of glasses. If somebody has some vision issues, you're like, oh yeah, edges. That's right. Leaves. They have edges. You get this little extra clarity, and it's kind of like if someone's taken Adderall, taken Ritalin, there is a quietness that creeps in. If you're somebody who has classic ADHD, lots of theta, you take a stimulant, it will quiet your mind generally. And it was very much that, but not a drug effect. And in the field of neurofeedback, the SMR training, which is the core frequency that the field was built on, sensory motor rhythm. If you've seen a cat on a windowsill, you've seen SMR. It's this liquid body and laser-like focus, completely inhibited in the body and still in the mind, poised. If you bring up your SMR, you will get more self-control. But if you're not used to having lots of SMR, if you have tons of theta taking over for it instead, and you're kind of fidgety and twitchy and ADHD, the first time your SMR comes up strongly for a few hours, it's like someone cleaned the windshield. You're like, oh, okay. And it's easier to think, and it's quieter, and you can, and here's the fun part. You don't lose anything. You can still move into like playing the video game or being the best athlete on the court or being the artist. You're not stuck in a mode the way that a stimulant might quiet the system, but like make you chew your lip and not want to eat and put you in one mode. This doesn't put you in a mode. It gives you access to the modes. You can kind of reach for that quietness when you wish, and you're suddenly more balanced.
That's something that I've heard, and even with the neurofeedback that I've done, like experienced as well. And I'm curious about that. Like, what is it about what neurofeedback does that makes it more of like an adaptive trait that you can switch on and off versus like a change, right? Because to your point, like I think most of the time when we think about things, it's like, oh, I'm going to get this thing, but I'm going to lose that. Like everything has its cost, everything has its benefit, da, da, da. But there is something similar where it seems like you're able to keep the core or the pieces that you want with this thing but get the benefits of focus without losing the creativity and the insight and the joy and the other parts that come with it.